Chapter 15. Brenda Jean buttoned her blouse nervously, hoping Harry would snap out of his trance. She had seen these seizures before, at the base hospital in Okinawa, but each one was new and frightening. In World War I, it was called shell shock. In World War II, battle fatigue. But Vietnam seemed to produce a new and more virulent strain of total nervous exhaustion. She had seen bad cases, but this was one of the worst. She knew better than force him out before he was ready. "That's all right, Harry. I'll go start the car." The girl trudged up the hill quietly. The drive back was a quiet one. Harry took the wheel. There was little conversation. Brenda watched him out of the corner of her eye. Was this really the man she wanted to marry? Brenda watched the endless highway ahead, hypnotized by the click-clack of grooves in the pavement. The shadows on Harry's face deepened. The sun faded until at last Brenda saw her own reflection in the car window. Who is this man? She asked herself. The reflection in the window had no answer. Later, Brenda talked to one of Harry's friends. He told her the rest of the story. "Scared you when he screamed, didn't he?" Reed LeBeau always spoke softly, but he spoke even softer now. Harry was in the next room playing pool. "He did the same thing with me when we bunked together. I was in his second squad. He gets like that when he thinks about his first squad." Reed moved closer to Brenda, stirring his drink as he spoke. "Harry was in Vietnam 3 weeks when his squad got sent up the line on point to take some hill or other. Anyway, Harry got the shits and had to pull out a line and head for the bushes. By the time he finished, the rest of the guys had moved on. He found them one at a time. Ambushed. The gooks had picked them off from the rear, so the others wouldn't know. Harry was the only one who survived in his squad. I was the first one to meet him on the trail back to base. I'll never forget the look in his eye, walking up that trail, holding 8 dog tags in his fist. Anyway, ever since then, he's gotten these flashbacks, and I guess you know the rest." Brenda knew the rest. She asked herself countless times, was this the man she wanted to marry? Brenda knew Harry could be very kind and then be exactly the opposite. His behavior confused her, but there was one thing that was crystal clear. She had to get out of her parents' house. Her fear of Louis was increasing, and she began methodically casting for a way out. Fast approaching 18, Brenda was still too young to get her own apartment. She didn't have enough money anyway. Louis treated his nightly visits as some kind of fatherly privilege instead of an occasional need. When he first raped her, she had been desperately afraid. By the time Brenda was 12, he was raping her face to face, and the hatred she felt was real, but still afraid to show itself. At 14, the hatred turned inward, blasting the girl's soul not with a fiery temper, but encasing it in a block of icy nothingness. She felt nothing, she desired nothing, she wished for nothing. These were the times Louis would lay on her, noisily stroking, a noise to fill the vast empty void which settled over the sweating man and the lifeless figure beneath him. Brenda remembered nothing but the first instant of his appearance, when he opened the bedroom door. "He is dead. He is nothing but a dead man," Brenda would say, the words echoing off the walls of her mind. "A dead man can't screw you, Bryn. It's nothing at all, really. Who is he? What is he? Unthinking sinew, mindless muscle driven by the synapses of the spinal cord using tiny electric impulses. Don't feel, don't touch, don't. It really doesn't hurt." Then the words disappeared, the walls disappeared. Everything was totally white and blank and fine. At 16, there had been James, who had opened her heart and breathed life and passion into her dead libido. The pleasure had been so great that Brenda was even able to withstand her father's attentions for a time, as cattle tolerate the incessant buzzings of flies. At 17, Brenda realized her mind had traveled very far in its understanding, and no longer was she afraid of her father's physical threats. Her one desire was simply to get out. If there was fear in her heart, it was a fear that in her growing anger she would kill her father instead of the other way around. First there had been the fear, then hatred. There were the years of caring, then not caring, and with the instinct of survival came the instinct to kill, to protect that which was hers. She was not a criminal, but if she stayed in that house much longer, She knew she could become one. There was one escape, however. Harry was even stronger than her father. Harry had a rather jolly look about him, but no picture captured the selfishness that lurked like a shadow in the recesses of his soul. All his life, Harry had lived on the precipice of good and evil. His stepfather, the Reverend Joshua B. Donovan, was an honestly religious man who spent his life energy building churches all over North Carolina. Harry's mother was a shadowy figure with a dubious past, who on her deathbed could not identify Harry's real father, nor his name, nor even his nationality. Harry had joined the Army at 17. Sent to Vietnam before his 18th birthday, he spent the next 2 years in the infantry, his selfishness reinforced by the simple task of staying alive. He returned to the States barely old enough to vote, yet he had the look of a middle-aged man. Harry Donovan returned to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with a tainted past and no demonstrated ability except the skill to kill. If she married Harry, Brenda would pass from the hands of the man she hated into the possession of a man she didn't know. But what else was there to know, except that most important thing? Harry would keep her from Lewis Campbell forever. There was a brief ceremony at the Justice of the Peace office that January. In 4 months, Brenda would finish school. In the meantime, she assumed the duties of housekeeper, a title she had held unofficially for so long in her father's house. With Harry in the Army, finances were always at the bottom of the barrel, and it took all the couple had just to pay the car note, rent, and food bill. Their life wasn't great, but it was better than Brenda's life under Lewis' roof. At last, she had escaped. Harry was gone every other weekend on maneuvers, which meant that Brenda stayed alone at the trailer. Every night, Brenda sat in her housecoat at the tiny yellow dining table, watching the darkness fall, and remembered the many times she had begged him not to go. She had an irrational fear that Lewis would find her at the trailer by herself. There was also the irrational joy that Harry would return to find Lewis reverting to his old ways with his daughter. Truthfully, Brenda didn't really know how Harry would react to Lewis, but she hoped it would put the odds in her favor. The day after the ceremony, Brenda and Harry had walked arm in arm to Lewis Campbell's front door for the first time as man and wife. Brenda had so looked forward to this moment. At last she would be free of her father and under the protection of another man. Then the door opened. Lewis smiled and extended his hand. "Well, Corporal Donovan, or should I say son?" Harry smiled back. "Call me anything you like, Sergeant Campbell, sir. Just keep making those damn cupcakes. It's the only thing I'll live on, otherwise I'd have to eat that shit at the barracks." That night, Harry, his pals, and Lewis played poker until 4 in the morning. Brenda felt a cold, sinking feeling in her gut. Her husband and her father were far from opposite. In fact, she could not begin to analyze just how similar they were. Now she could never tell Harry what James had known about Lewis. Brenda would be accusing one of Harry's best buddies, his poker partner. Harry would never believe it. In February, Harry left on maneuvers. Brenda had watched television until 10, then went to bed. She had just laid down when a dark figure moved outside the trailer. A cigarette lighter flared for a moment as the key was inserted in the front door. The key Harry had loaned so someone could check on my little girl. The lighter was snapped shut. The doorknob was turned. It was Lewis. Brenda had drifted into a thin, troubled sleep in which she dreamed again of Lewis bending over her, whispering in her ear. Once again he pulled the covers, the clothing from her. Once again she watched, frozen with the old terror as he stood over her nude body and unbuckled his belt. Brenda's heart pounded and her eyes screamed to open, but she could only imagine him taking off the rest of his clothes, invisible in the darkness above. Her eyes opened, but it was nothing, only a dead man. After Lewis had gone, Brenda did not cry, as she usually did. "No one will hurt me again," she repeated to herself, laboring in the bathroom. Her mouth was set in a grim line as she stepped back to the bedroom, her skin glowing from the scalding hot shower. She had to stop it herself. No one could help her now. Harry would never believe it. James was gone. Brenda sat on the bed, gazing across the room at the moonlight streaming through the curtains. The smoke from her cigarette mixed with the unearthly light, casting ghostly shadows on the chair, the table, the dresser, Brenda's eyes narrowed as she stood up and inspected the dresser more closely. Yes, there it was. Harry's .38 caliber revolver. The extra one. Not the standard field issue .45 he always took to the field. The ghostly light reflected in Brenda's eyes as she slid the gun from the dresser and stroked it in the palms of her hands. A month passed. Harry had left 4 hours before, and Brenda had spent the rest of the day remembering. The sun was down. Soon there would be no more time for memories. Brenda stubbed out her cigarette at the table and flipped off the coffee pot. She glanced at her watch. 7. Too nervous to watch television, Brenda walked back to the bedroom, opening a window to hear what? Everything. She listened to the indefinable hum in the March air that came from no particular insect. It was the sound of spring. She inhaled the sweet fragrance of honeysuckle and mimosa as it drifted lazily past the windowsill. The left eye of the moon was just visible in the darkness of the first quarter. It was almost 10 before the unearthly light rose high enough to etch a steely glow across the barrel of the gun that had rested for an hour in Brenda's steady hand. There was a movement outside. It was more than insects, but Brenda scarcely heard it. She was still remembering. Frederick. Naha. Jamie. Junior. If she ever had a child, would she name it Jamie? Ha ha. There was only the mimosa and the honeysuckle, and the scratching in the lock of the door. The world had stopped, and there was only the deafening hum of the crickets, and the click of the key in the doorknob, and Brenda Jean Donovan, and the shadowy form of a man standing in the dark entrance to the trailer. Just a dead man. The gun bucked and flared, and Brenda lay back on the bed, smiling as she listened to the strange noises the man made on her kitchen floor. She did not get up until the police came, and only then did she move to that man. The police waved their flashlights across the face, and it was not Lewis on the floor. It was only a burglar. She had only shot him in the leg. The ambulance came, and Brenda looked at the man. She looked up to the moon, saying, I'm sorry, and she knew she should have waited until the moon was full. Then the ambulance was gone, the police were gone, and she stood alone in the doorway, and only the crickets heard her say, I'm sorry it wasn't him. That night Brenda cried, and only she, God, and Lewis Campbell knew why. A week later, Lewis left his key with Harry. You better find somebody to look out for my little girl. I won't have time to check on her. As the years passed, the echoes of her father's voice grew fainter, but Brenda never completely covered the memory of those years with forgetfulness. She sat in the apartment one rainy Saturday afternoon, watching some women being interviewed on a television show. These women were special because they had been raped once. They spoke about the many years of psychiatric help required to rebuild their shattered egos. They talked and talked about the incident that had scarred their souls forever. Brenda sat in her little apartment and remembering the happy 4-year-old who couldn't wait to see her daddy and Frederick, remembering how she felt after he crept up to her bedroom. She wished she could tell those women what it was like, day after day, month after month, year after year. They were her own kind in a way, but they couldn't understand how she felt. There was no way she could make them understand. She was of their genus, but not their species. She was her own kind. In the end, everyone was their own peculiar kind, and alone with their pain. She rocked back and forth in the chair, considering a confession to Harry. No, she could never tell him about Lewis. There was no physical evidence. There had never been any bruises, broken bones, syphilis, gonorrhea, or internal injuries. No, Harry would never believe her. People never believe what they cannot see. Brenda dozed in her chair, remembering. She could see her daddy, the protector of the home, the man she loved for no other reason than the fact that he was her daddy. She could see the things he did to her, and she could hear his voice saying, I'll always love my little girl. And she could see his face when she asked what her mother looked like, and he said, go look in the mirror. She could see him when they got the news that Tammy Ann Osgood was dead, and how he cried, this 6-foot army sergeant, and she could not understand why she could not understand. Brenda remembered Aunt Jane's story when Lewis was 12, and Grandpa Campbell struck Aunt Jane hard across the face, and how Lewis watched, and how he ran across the room to attack the man for what he had done, knowing already he would be close to death after being beaten by Campbell's bare hands. Brenda awoke, still feeling her father's creeping hands under her dress, and she realized how evil went on, and realized it had not been a dream, but was the reality of her life and the reality of lives before hers. Brenda heard the clock's steady ticking, the sunshine creeping across the floor. An eye for an eye, she thought. One murder, one eye. But how to prorate consecutive rape? How could she hurt him as he hurt her? Biologically, that was impossible. She could only visualize brief moments of anger, delicious bits of violent and releasing rage that satisfied her heart and soul. Brenda never faced her father and told him how much she hated him for what he did. A terrifying thought entered her mind. What if he died before she had a chance to tell him? That thought was more terrible than any other. While he was alive, they both would carry the memories, but once he passed on, she would carry them alone. Brenda could visualize the dreadful news of Louis' death and entering the funeral home, filled with the silent anger from every year she held his secret, approaching the bier, furious at how he had cheated her once again and for the final time. Brenda saw herself leaning over the casket, shouting mindlessly at the pale figure within, and saw herself reach inside her purse for a butcher knife and performing all sorts of atrocities on the body, repaying it in kind for all the years before. She would turn and face the horrified mourners, and from her lips would ooze the awful secret which none of the relatives knew. She would storm out of the chapel, leaving the embalming fluid slowly dripping out of the evil box up front. Brenda tried to forget her father, for Harry had his own peculiar moods. Brenda began to understand her husband, and a small warm feeling grew, slowly. There was the time when she had the kidney infection, and Louis came to the trailer with Margot and Junior. "Dad, I feel horrible. I think I need to go to the doctor." Louis put his hand on Brenda's forehead as she lay on the couch. "Yeah, you feel hot, babe. Your mother and I have to go to the airport. We just stopped by for a minute. Better tell Harry when he gets home this evening." Brenda shook her head slowly, trying to clear the fog that was building behind her feverish stare. "Dad, I think I'd better go this afternoon. I don't feel good at all." Louis looked at his watch. "Listen, babe, what if we leave Junior here with you? That way, if anything happens, he can help." Brenda reached for her brother's hand. "Junior, tell him. I feel really bad. Please." Junior felt the urgency in her voice. "Dad, I don't think Brenda's kidding. She really looks sick." Louis waved him off. "We really have to get to the airport. Call the house if Brenda gets to feeling any worse, and we'll come right over. Harry'll drop you off tonight when he gets in, Junior." Junior called the house every 20 minutes after that. No one answered. When Harry did pull into the driveway 4 hours later, Junior met him in the yard. After taking Brenda to the hospital, Harry drove over to Louis' house. "Hi, son. How's Brenda?" "The doctor said another hour, and she'd have gone into kidney failure. Junior said you were with her this morning. Why the hell didn't you take her word for it she was sick?" "Well, we had to get to the airport, Harry, and I just thought—" Harry turned away, as if staring into the distance. Louis was still talking when Harry turned back and, like lightning, threw a punch that landed squarely on Louis' jaw and laid him flat on his back. He knew better than move, seeing the look in Harry's eyes, just slits now, daring him to get up. "Thanks for nothing, you son of a bitch. That's for Brenda." Harry and Brenda had enough extra cash to go to drive-in movies with friends, or spend Friday night eating popcorn and playing cards. This was the calm and steady world she had drifted into when, one day in the fall, Brenda realized she was pregnant. Pregnancy wasn't quite as easy as Brenda had hoped. There was the episode with Harry's wind dummy. "Hey, Bren, you want to come watch me jump?" Harry said one night as they sat together on the couch watching television. A member of the paratroopers, he had a routine jump coming up. Brenda patted her stomach. "Sure, little Harry and I can watch you together." Harry left the trailer at 4 the next morning. Brenda drove to the base at 7. Civilians were already lining up along the edge of the jump area. Helicopters moved slowly into position. Harry's was second in the formation. Brenda watched expectantly as the doors slid open on the hovering aircraft. She could almost see the outline of his glasses under his helmet as Harry stepped up to the opening. The green-jacketed form appeared in the doorway, pitched forward, and plummeted to the ground, where it landed with a sickening thud. Paratroopers rained out of the sky as the crowd applauded. Brenda stared upward, too shocked to utter a sound. She looked aimlessly at the sky, then back to the motionless form on the ground. It was being taken away. Now what? Brenda made her way slowly back to the parking lot. They would call her at the trailer. She needed to be there by the phone. 3 hours later, the door opened. It was Harry. "Well, Bren, how was the jump? Did you like it?" Brenda looked up from her chair by the phone, staring at the ghost. "Harry? Hey, what's wrong? You look like somebody died or something." Brenda reached slowly for Harry's arm, feeling it gently at first. "Ouch, Bren, what's that for?" "Harry, you told me you would be the first one out. I watched, and the first one fell out flat on its face. I thought you were dead. I was sitting here waiting to hear from your commander." Harry grinned sheepishly. "I'm sorry, Bren. I forgot to tell you. That was the wind dummy. They always throw it out first to check the wind speed. I was the second thing out the door." The pregnancy continued uneventfully until the night Harry rolled over to touch his wife and leaped out of bed. She had actually burned him. Brenda awoke 7 days later in the post-hospital. She had borne a 105-degree fever for 6 consecutive days, battling a bad case of bronchitis. She had heard stories about what fever could do to an unborn child. For the first time, Brenda felt the mother's dread that her child might not be normal. The old stories of Harry's Vietnam drug experiences came to mind, increasing her fears. Incredibly, the baby did survive, and Tracy Donovan arrived in the early summer, after Brenda turned 19. Brenda stayed at home with the child for a year, remembering the promise from her childhood, remembering the hours alone at her grandparents' while they both worked. With the baby to care for, Harry's pay hardly covered the mounting expenses. Still, Brenda stayed at home with Tracy. She would keep her promise. Jamie would like that. Harry and Brenda played poker every Friday. Every other night Harry was off duty, but he seldom stayed home. "We could stay home tonight and make popcorn, Harry. Tracy likes popcorn," Brenda would say. "Nah," Harry replied. "I'm going to play some pool with the guys." He stopped at the doorway. "Maybe I can make some extra money since you just stay at home all the time." Their first Christmas started out fine. Harry lay on the floor next to Tracy, burbling at the child. Brenda sat in the armchair, knitting an outfit for the baby. Tracy poked her father's arm. Harry made cooing noises as the child steadily advanced her fingers across his bare chest. Brenda was almost dozing when Harry yelled. "Brenda, get this kid off of me," he said, the words barely escaping from his teeth. Tracy had grabbed a handful of hair on her father's chest and was clenching it with all the intensity of her 6-month-old grip. Brenda was almost choked with laughter. Harry was not amused. "Bren, quit laughing. Get this kid off." Slowly, deliberately, Brenda pried the baby's fingers loose, and at last Harry was free. "Harry, she didn't mean to hurt you," Brenda said. His look was a brutal stare. "I know." Harry lay on the floor a while longer, staring at the ceiling. Tracy instinctively stayed on her side of the room. Without a word, he got up and retreated into the bedroom. In a moment, he returned, dressed, with his pool cue case tucked under his arm. "I'm going out." He didn't return until 1 o'clock that morning. Brenda waited up until he got in. "I'm sorry about Tracy," she said quietly as he undressed in the darkness. "I know, Bren. I just, had to get out for a while. I'm like that." "It's okay, Harry." The couple lay together on the bed. Brenda looked up into the darkness. "Why don't we go out next Friday to the club, Harry? I can get a sitter." Harry leaned down to his wife. In the darkness, she could almost see him smile. "That's the girl I married." "I love you, Harry." "I love you too, Bren." Harry and Brenda became regulars at the club. Surrounded with his army buddies, Harry felt relaxed. He smiled and laughed most often when they were together, playing cards, drinking, dancing, having a good time, as Harry would say. Harry and Brenda played as partners in the poker championships. They were good together. "Give me 3 cards," Brenda said, sipping her glass of water with a twist of lime. Are you sure? Harry said across the table. Yep. Here they are, little lady, the dealer said. Hope you know what you're doing. Brenda laid down 3 kings and 2 jacks. The little lady has a full house, the dealer exclaimed, grinning in Brenda's face. Harry's eyes shifted from his cards back across the table. Hey, Dixon, lay out the little lady stuff. Just deal the cards. Sure, Donovan, just kidding. Anyway, I'm just appreciating a good card player when I see one. Just keep your appreciation to yourself. Dixon wasn't listening. Brenda had asked for 2 more cards. Harry, can you play? Nope. You go ahead, Bren. All right. Sorry, guys, but I've got a flush, Brenda said, laying down 5 spades. Jesus, that's amazing, Evans said, throwing down his cards. Hey, Deb, bring me a beer. I can't outplay Mrs. Donovan, but I know what I am good at. Excuse me, folks, I'll be back in a minute, Brenda said, rising from the table and walking towards the bathrooms. Dixon watched her as she walked. He let out a low whistle. That's when Harry stood up. You didn't have to hit him, Harry, Brenda said on the way home. I know, Harry replied, nursing his sore jaw. I just get jealous, that's all. I can't control it sometimes. Besides, that jerk deserved it. He was staring at you the whole night. Brenda leaned closer to her husband. Harry, when we were married, I promised to love you, and I meant it. Don't worry about guys like that. Harry smiled. Yeah, I guess you're right. Brenda's year with Tracy drew to a close, and she knew she would have to go to work. Coming from an Army family, married to a soldier, her career choice was obvious. Brenda reported to basic training as soon as the child was old enough for a sitter. Something the couple had not bargained for was Uncle Sam's indifference to keeping married personnel at the same post at the same time. Harry was sent to Germany for almost a year before Brenda could join him. More and more often, Brenda and the baby lived alone and off her solitary income. Each day she trudged down the driveway to get the mail. Almost every day she found a bill or 2 from Harry. His paycheck seemed to acquire a life of its own, a wanderlust that only occasionally brought it to Brenda's mailbox. Luckily for Brenda's sake, the check recorded amounts only, never the words with which it was shoved into the FPO box in Germany. Bitch. All she wants is my money. I deserve some of it at least. Harry wrote out Brenda's portion in what he thought were equitable amounts, and he never remembered the exact mechanics whereby his lifestyle improved. He congratulated himself on his money management ability. Collect phone calls home were easier on his overseas budget. He could save more money by sending 2 checks in 1 envelope. I'm all alone here, he said as he sipped a beer every night in Friedberg. Nobody looks out for me, he muttered, and it didn't matter whether he was in southern Germany or South Vietnam at that moment. His letters came less and less frequently. Eventually he ran out of envelopes. Now he could save even more money. Brenda always scraped up enough change to keep the baby fed. She stole peanut brittle out of the commander's desk for her own lunch. Taking it back to her tiny office cubicle, she reread Harry's last letter, often 2 months old. With every bite of the hard candy, Brenda swore she would never go hungry again. It was as if Harry had divorced her. The commander did what he could to speed up Brenda's transfer papers to Germany. He wanted his peanut brittle back. Shortly after she arrived, Brenda realized why Harry had never sent much money home. He spent his weekends in the bars instead of the apartment. It was as if Harry's Vietnam personality had come back to haunt her with a vengeance. She had to be there at the German whorehouse, requesting to see her husband. She had to be there when her bed was still warm with the heat of another woman. She had to be there for the 6 doses of penicillin after Harry's gonorrhea was diagnosed in her own body. She had to endure all this because her daughter was under Harry's military orders, not hers. To leave Harry would mean leaving the baby, too. Brenda waited for Harry to change his ways. How many times did the Bible say to forgive? After the tour in Germany was over, Harry, Brenda, and Tracy returned to the States, renting a small apartment near Fort Bragg. Harry's bar hopping continued as before, and Brenda kept hoping for a change that would not come. Life together wasn't what she had hoped for, but it seemed no more or less than the neighbors' lives, and anyway, it was her life. No longer at the mercy of Lewis Campbell, freed from the house Brenda had left behind in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. The couple saved enough money to buy their own house. It was a long, rambling ranch style surrounded with fragrant pine trees on a large lot. The red gravel drive bordered the side entrance of the house. The backyard had room for a pool, and a sun deck had already been built. Brenda was excited, hoping this would settle Harry down. The first night, fixing supper and humming to herself, Brenda noticed Harry walking back and forth from the living room to the front door. He was carrying pieces of the stereo. The front door opened and closed. The stereo got smaller and smaller. On the way past the kitchen, holding a speaker in either hand, Harry informed Brenda of his project. "I can't stand the responsibility of a wife and child anymore. I'm moving out."